guys. There's been a lot of discussion that I've noticed lately in the group about our PA system and exactly how loud it is and things like that, and how we could possibly make it louder by just throwing money and stuff at it. And you know, Alex and I both, and Al as well, have a pretty good understanding of how PA systems works after owning them and things like that. So you know, and it's like I see a lot of the volunteers at 1919, you know, running sound and stuff that don't necessarily always run sound, and you know, they're certainly doing the best job what they can with what they know. And hopefully this video will kind of show you, you know, the different parts of a PA system, and then we're going to go to 1919 and we're going to show how I run PA system at 1919, and you know, how I kind of think it works and stuff like that. Of course, like, I'm sure I'll screw something up and piss you guys off or whatever, but anyways, I hope that you can kind of learn a little bit about this stuff and just get, you know, do a better job, basically. Better than me, maybe. Who knows? But essentially, we're going to start out by looking at some of the different parts of my PA system here. My PA system isn't the exact same PA system as 1919, but since I'm doing this, you know, hopefully we can save some time by just looking at what I have and then going to 1919 and me showing you around there. So basically, this mixer is pretty much the same mixer that we have at 1919. At the top here, we have our inputs. So we have an XLR input for each of these 4 channels, which 1919 has the same, as well as some mic line inputs, which is, you know, we usually use the snake to control, you know, what line is going into what. But on the snake, you have little numbers on each of those channels, and each of those channels represents a different wire coming out of the rattler, or the output end of the snake. And each of those wires has a number corresponding to them. And at 1919, we have them lined up so that channel 1 on the snake corresponds to the wire. That's channel 1, which plugs into channel 1 in the mixer, to 2, to 3, to 4, to vice versa. So that's kind of the input section of the mixer. And the other section of our mixer at 1919 is we have a stereo out. Sorry, it's a little bit dirty, I've been gigging it. Stereo out and monitor out. And basically that corresponds to these 2 knobs down here at the bottom. Look down here. We have a stereo knob and a monitor or headphones kind of knob. And as you see here, with this disengaged and engaged, we're essentially sending with the stereo out. That means that this right here is going to correspond to the stereo out. With it plugged in, it's basically going to correspond, this LED display is going to correspond to the signal that's being sent to here. Now, whether or not that's accurate to the amplifier and its attenuation levels, who knows? But you know, in this particular instance, I mean, that's what that button does. But essentially, this knob right here, the stereo knob, corresponds to the stereo out signal on the top of this mixer, and the monitor out on this mixer corresponds to the volume levels coming out of the monitors and this little headphone jack. So that's pretty much the kind of like input output. There's a couple other things here. There's like some RCA, but as you can see, they each correspond to a particular channel, and you know, that's what they do. So on the mixer here, we have a couple different sections.
On the mixer.
Yeah, we've got. Well, let me get these kind of leveled out for you, so you're not totally confused on exactly what it is that I'm looking at here. But essentially, we've got this top section, which is kind of like our gain structure, and the compression on this mixer is actually post gain, obviously because of how gain works, and I'll explain that later. So gain essentially works with the idea, and I'm talking about the gain knob on the mixer back there, which is that white knob on the top of each channel. If you turn up that knob, you're basically increasing the signal that's going to be allowed to be sent to this microphone, from the microphone to the mixer. So right here, when I'm talking to this microphone, the diaphragm within the microphone is actually vibrating. Out here it's vibrating as well. But the thing is when I turn up the gain on that mixer, I increase the amount of signal from that vibrating diaphragm within this microphone that I'm going to allow to pass through the wire to the mixer to the amplifier, and so on. So when I increase the amount of amount of signal that's coming from this microphone, I'm increasing the distance at which this microphone is going to be picking up my voice. So if I turn it up a lot, it's going to be picking up everything in this room. You're going to get the full vibrations from all of the points at which this diaphragm in this microphone is vibrating, and eventually it's going to feed back. If I turn it down a lot, you're not going to be able to hear much. Only about this close all the way. If it's turned down all the way, this is about how close how close my face is going to have to be to hear it. So if you're singing in a band or something, you want it somewhere in between here and here. If you're a hardcore guy, oh, this is a mic check. You want to have it up real close to them. And finally, on that note, for hardcore shows, it's definitely a good idea to turn up the post gain on the compressor and turn down the gain on the amplifier, or on the mixer, because what ends up happening is people are going to be trugging around in front of these two Crown Vegas, and because of the subwoofers, it's going to feed back, and there's really nothing that you can do to stop it. So yeah, it's just a good idea just to kind of ignore the fact that at that point there's really nothing that you can do, because people are going to be moving back and forth in front of these speakers and yelling, and the bands are so damn loud. If you did turn them down and it stopped feeding back, you wouldn't even be able to hear the vocals. So just keep that in mind. But that's essentially it. But essentially, like, we have these little gain knobs, and the gain knobs basically represent how much signal is being sent from this microphone to this PA system, or to this mixer. So if the gain is up higher, then we're taking in more signal at this microphone, and if it's lower, then we're going to get less signal from this microphone into this mixer. So that's kind of how that works. And so then we have this button right here. What that represents is a frequency cut. So when we engage this button, we're basically cutting off the lower frequencies of the signal coming into this PA system from this microphone. So when we engage this, we're receiving more signal, and when we disengage it, we're receiving less. But it's very specific in exactly what frequencies in that signal we're allowing to come into this mixer. So we have something like an acoustic guitar or a keyboard. Well, maybe not an acoustic guitar, but an instrument that has a power supply, that has a computer, it's digital, or maybe an analog synth, something of that nature. We might want to disengage that cut, because those instruments might have a wide range of frequencies that might be needed to make the sound good. So a keyboard, for instance, for sure, we would definitely want to disengage that cut. But for a microphone, for frequency response sakes, and the fact that we don't really use those frequencies in our microphone, and also because to cut back on feedback, we definitely want to have that engaged. So the next section of this gain section here is the compression knob. And on these little mixers, the same kind that we have at 1919, we have what's called over easy compression. And compression works in a couple different ways. You can use it to do a lot of things, like make certain parts of drums sound less as loud or more as loud as other parts of a drum set, or things like that. But essentially what we use it for here is just to kind of bring up the volume of the signal. 1919's PA system runs with kind of a cold gain kind of situation. We'll talk about that later. But essentially, this compression, what compression does is basically it brings kind of like what's the word? It kind of rounds the sound, or the dynamic of the sound. It makes something that's quiet the same volume as something that may be as loud in the signal. So if I yell into this microphone and I have the gain up all the way, and then I whisper into this microphone, it'll actually, the whisper will have as much volume as if I was yelling into this microphone. And if I had this all the way down, if I whispered into this microphone, it would have less volume than if I yelled into this microphone. So and basically by playing with this compression knob, we're playing with how loud
and soft, and the dynamics of this that we have. And at 1919, we like to have this somewhere around here. It sounds pretty good, somewhere around here. Al and Lacey, I don't know. I see you guys running around here. Alex likes to have it somewhere around here as well. So usually nothing over about 12 o'clock. Anything past 12 o'clock is going to be a little bit, too much compression. But yeah, if you ever see these knobs and they're turned up like that, just turn it back down a little bit. Maybe turn them off if you want. For a keyboard, or an instrument that's coming in one of these input jacks up here, we definitely want to have the compression down. But for something like maybe like an acoustic guitar, we would definitely want to hear that in the mix. We definitely want to hear that, while that person's singing. We want to add a little bit of compression. But there can be some problems with that. If you've ever noticed during a show that someone's voice is causing another instrument in the mix to kind of fade in or fade out, this is where that problem is occurring, because it's kind of being prioritized on a frequency highway. It's kind of how sound works. But essentially, let's skip past all that and let's move to the different parts in the mixer here. So here we have the effects and the EQ of this mixer, and then the line, the actual volume of this channel, as well as the panning and things like that. So all of these red knobs across represent the different panning levels, left to right for this particular mixer. And at 1919, we run all of our signal mono, so from the monitor out, and we'll get into that later. But essentially at 1919, you should be seeing all of these knobs to the left. They should always be to the left. If you ever see them in the center or on the right, you need to immediately turn them back to the left. That's just how the PA system at 1919 is currently, as of today, set up, and that's just how it works. This is the level for the channel. So we have this knob, which basically represents how much signal we're sending through the channel and allowing to kind of go through the overall volume of the channel to the output of this mixer, which then that is controlled by this knob right here, this red knob at the end of the mixer. So on top of that, we have this EQ section, which is represented by these green knobs. And most of these channels are the same except for this one, and I'll talk about this one later. But basically, this is our high frequencies right here, and this is our lows, or our mids, I'm sorry. This is our mid frequencies, and then these are our lows. And at 1919 with vocals, we definitely want to have the lows kind of cut just a bit. Lows aren't something that you're going to be using in a vocal performance. It's, because we only run vocals, it's not a knob that needs to be turned out. In fact, to reduce feedback, it needs to be, cut quite a bit. I, at hardcore shows, love to just turn it all the way off, because it really just, because of how loud those bands are, those low frequencies will feedback. And by just turning this knob all the way down, I can actually eliminate a lot of that feedback. So it's definitely a knob that you want to have down. This knob right here, the middle section of the knob, because 1919 is such a large room and it's created with concrete, it reverberates a lot. And a lot of those reverberations come from those middle frequencies or mid-range frequencies in the mix of all of these different little instruments that people use, and also just their voices in the room echoing off the walls and things like that. So to combat that signal coming back into the microphone, we actually kind of cut those mid frequencies just a little bit. Nothing too drastic. I mean, you don't want to do anything like that. You just want to have it somewhere around here, maybe even a little bit more. If they're singing and they're not a very loud band, they don't need the full volume of our PA system. A little boost wouldn't hurt them, but really, you don't want to do anything too drastic here. You just might want to cut it just a little bit. And what that's going to do is that's actually going to eliminate a lot of the ringing that you're going to hear, and it's going to solve a lot of the problems that you'll hear as well. And if you're ever having any real issues with feedback and you just can't get this damn thing to sound right, start here. This is where you need to start. If not here at the top of the gain structure. If you don't think that this is a problem, this is probably where you need to start. So finally we have our highs, and really this knob doesn't really need to be touched. It can be the source of some feedback, but not usually, and during hardcore shows and things like that, it's not something that I ever mess with. Indie pop bands, things like that we have, you know, emo bands, whatever, bands that are more contemporary than American hardcore or weirdo punk or whatever it is that we have, you know, I don't ever mess with that. So, I mean, really the only knob that I ever seem to mess with here is this midsection knob. So, moving on, we have this effects section on my mixer, which basically corresponds to this digital effects section on the mixer here. So we're not really going to talk about that because there's not an effects section at 1919. In fact, I believe right here is an aux send channel on the 1919 channel, and I guess if you had someone that was wanting to record with one of those handheld recorders and they had an output coming from up here in one of these RCA record out sections, you could send a little bit more volume to them from a particular channel, but I'm not quite sure if we actually have that or not. But essentially the last part of this is going to be this mixer, this channel here on the mixer, and what we use this for mostly at 1919, and a lot of people seem to kind of get this wrong, they'll pick the wrong channel, is we use this channel primarily for iPods. If someone wants to play the music through the PA, this is where they do it. You use an RCA to headphone jack kind of plug. I believe that I have one in here. I don't want to look. I don't know. I don't see it. But basically, red to white, you know, or red to red, white to white, goes into a phone, and then down here, down this channel, we have the volume controls for all of it. We have the highs, the lows, the effects, and of course the panning, which always needs to be left, and then the level. And at 1919, because of how cold we run the PA system and how high the output on the mixer is, you know, this is about as loud as you really need to ever get it. So moving on to this area of the mixer, again, I'm just going to talk about the basic levels that we tend to see with these two knobs at 1919, with this gain knob right here kind of turned down. So at 1919, we like to keep this knob down quite a bit. You know, usually nothing ever over there, and that's because our PA system really isn't set up at what we call unity. It's more so set up at kind of a colder level, where on the compressor, which I'll show you that in a minute, the output from this whole board is kind of boosted. You know, it's a little bit louder, you know, so it's a little noisy, but you know, it does the job. It gives us the amount of control that we need to do what we need to do. But you know, with the gain somewhere around here, you know, maybe even up here at 12 o'clock, I don't know if they're singing or something like that. You know, we like to have these knobs over here on the side of this mixer more so towards this direction. If you can see this triangle, I don't know if you can see that. It's right there next to this knob. That's actually probably the loudest you're ever going to want to push 1919's PA system. But for a band that's singing with a little bit more gain up there, you definitely want to turn it down. You know, it's gonna, but essentially it's gonna fall somewhere between this 1 o'clock area, you know, this 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock kind of section for the stereo output knob. For this knob, this monitor output knob, I actually find myself somewhere between here all the time, somewhere between, you know, 1 or 2, maybe 3 o'clock, just about the same place, definitely never over that. But you know, that's technically where I tend to see the knob. And the reason I'm pointing this out to you is because I see a lot of you guys running this PA system, you know, down here, and I can understand like when it's not, you know, a loud band, you know, definitely turn the sucker down. But this is actually going to be controlling the top speakers at 1919, and that's where a lot of the range and the sound and the mid and the good noise from people's voices is coming from. So definitely want to have that up. You know, the feedback is honestly going to be coming from these guys, since these are the bigger speakers and they got a bigger subwoofer in them. that's definitely where it's going to be coming from. So if you're ever going to run the sound system a little bit lower than usual, start here with this red knob, because I'll explain later when we get to 1919 how the signal is chained, and basically like this knob, when you turn it down, it's going to make this knob not as loud. So somewhere around here is going to be good all the time for that. But anyways, it's just I see you guys run it like this at hardcore shows, and I'm like, man, don't do that. And you'll have it running like this, and you'll be running these knobs over here all the way up, and this happening, and I'm just like, what are you guys doing? I don't know what is going on, but yeah, don't ever do that. Don't ever just turn up all the knobs all the way. It's not a good strategy. So how much time we got left in this little video here? 10 minutes? Okay, cool. So let's move down here to the next part of the system here. We actually have here. Let me stand this guy up so we can get out of here. Vertical. Yeah. So this is a pretty durable PA system. That's why I do this. This is like wires and junk down there. But essentially you have this, it's called a compressor. And mine's a little bit different from the one at 1919, but it's essentially doing the same thing. We're just going to ignore this side of the compressor because basically it's the exact same thing as this side of the compressor. So this side, so you want to show this? This side of the compressor has the exact same features and knobs as this side of the compressor, because they're just two different channels. So that's all that they do. But essentially, the first thing we have on channel 1 here is we have an expander gate and a compressor. The one at 1919, I believe, has a gate and a limiter on this section, so I'm just going to kind of ignore this. I don't really use gate on my compressor very much. As you can see, it's pretty much off. The threshold, so we're not really going to talk about it. If Alex wants to comment, make a comment in this video, I'm going to ask him, he can talk about it. But essentially, this is the section where, I'm playing with all the time at 1919, and we have this threshold, we have ratio, ignore this button here, we have attack, release, and then finally we have output gain. And don't ever touch these knobs. Just don't ever mess with them unless you know what you're doing. These have to do with how that signal is processed before it comes to this amplifier here on the bottom. Show the amplifier. This amplifier, which mine is GX5, but the 1919 has two amplifiers. But essentially, you don't ever need to be touching any of these four knobs here that say threshold, ratio, attack, and release. They have to do with how the compression, or the you remember how I was talking about on the mixer, how that little yellow knob made things kind of the same volume and that kind of thing. That's kind of what this is doing, except it's doing it in a way more drastic, way more accurate, way more controlled way. And the threshold is kind of at what dB does this thing engage. Ratio is kind of per dB that comes in, how many dBs are we going to compress. And then the attack time is how fast or slow we want the compression to occur. And then the release is when do we want the compressor to disengage. And then finally, this last knob here is the only knob you as a volunteer that's doing general sound running and stuff should be messing with, and that is the output gain knob. So on the mixer, we had a volume knob, and that signal through the stereo out and the monitor out are sent to this compressor at 1919, and that signal is then kind of sent here and then processed in this chain, and then it comes to this knob right here, and this is actually where the real volume of 1919's PA system lies. That's kind of just how it's set up. The gain is really low, post like pre-mixing, so from the microphone to the mixer to this compressor here, I mean, it's pretty low. But once it gets here, this is where it's boosted. So if we were to turn this knob all the way down to 0 here, and 1919, somebody would talk to the mic, it'd be pretty loud, but it wouldn't be close to the headroom or the real volume of this PA system, because the signal coming out, because the gain's all the way down, because the room rings out and stuff like that, is just so low, you know, that the signal is just, it's not going to sound very good. You're not going to be able to hear anybody. You know, it's going to be really quiet. For a hardcore show, there's no way they're going to be able to hear each other. But what you can do is you can take that signal that's just not quite loud enough, even though the volume on the mixer is turned up all the way, and you can kind of add some wiggle room on your mixer. You can kind of add some space between, you know, where the knob is turned up all the way and where the knob should be. You know, kind of like the center there. And you know, what I tend to do at 1919 is I'll kind of play around between this zero unity point. You want to show that?
Yes,
right
sir.
Here on this this guy. You're good, dude. You're doing a good job. This kind of zero section on this mixer. I don't know if you can see it. It's a little bit higher, like the number on it. Yeah, it's like right there. And then this 10 here on the side. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of turn this up to the 10. You know, I sometimes I do find myself going past it, but I always feel guilty when I do so because it's just so loud, you know. But you know, that's pretty much where it goes. And so that's where I like to keep it on mine. That's just because of how my PA system that I run is set up. But essentially, we want to back up a little bit so we can show the whole compressor. We have these two channels. And at 1919, and like I said before, just to reiterate, these two channels have the exact same knobs, like they do the exact same thing. They're just operating with a different input. But essentially, this channel right here at 1919 is controlling one set of speakers, and this channel right here is controlling another. So these two knobs right here could be in hypothetically, you know, in two different places. Same thing with these knobs here. You know, they could be definitely in two different places. And that's kind of how compression works. And you know, that's just how it's set up at 1919. You know, the signal is basically mono until it gets here. Then it's split into left and right. You know, one of these channels controls the top amplifier that you see at 1919, which is actually a PV. And the other channel, I believe it's the one on the left, but I'll have to check. We'll check when we get up there. Controls the Crown K1, which is the mother of 1919's PA system. That's where the majority of that power is coming from. So yeah, that's basically what's going on at 1919. And when we get there, I'll show you some other things and things like that. We could talk about gain structure and stuff like that. But that's basically the end of this section of the how to run sound as a 1919 volunteer section. But you know, hopefully this kind of gave you some insight. I could talk about the attenuation, but because of basically how I run it and how 1919 runs it, there's two different things. But if you could assume that attenuation is basically how sensitive this amplifier is to the volume of the signal coming out of this compressor, then you could say that this is like gain, or how much signal is going to be sent out to those speakers. So if it's up all the way, then that's basically saying that we are going, you know, it's going to be very sensitive. It's going to accept and listen to everything. But if we turn it down a bit, you know, it might be a little bit quieter and not as responsive. So, you know, that being said, we're going to go ahead and call it here. Thanks for watching, guys.
1919 Productions.
So, as I was saying before, yeah, so there is an aux end and everything's pan left. Just like so, now you can actually see the 1919 Hemphill mixer, and how this is actually constructively laid out here is we've got, like I said before, how our stereo corresponds to this channel and our monitor corresponds to this channel as outputs. Well, if we look, we actually have on the snake we have channel or snake rattler number 19, which is a 1/4 inch TSLR output, which means it has a dual channel kind of like stereo plug on it. That's right there, and then that's left. That goes into the stereo out, and then we have this guy, which is number 20, as you can see right there, which goes into the monitor out. And that's pretty much how that's plugged in. And as I said before, on this snake rattler we have Channel 1 corresponds to channel 1 on the mixer. Channel 2 corresponds to channel 2 on the mixer. Channel 4 corresponds to channel 4, and channel 3 corresponds to channel 3. Of course, this could change in the event that one of these stops working or someone wants to do something else. So, like I was saying before about guitars and keyboards and things like that, we don't really require direct boxes. All that you're actually going to accomplish with that is a little bit of noise reduction. It's really not going to add too much, but I mean, a direct box is preferred if they have one. If they don't, that's perfectly fine, because essentially this snake actually has on the 1/4-inch outputs TSLR, which means that, see these two lines in comparison to a guitar cable, which only has one. One corresponds to a left and one corresponds to a right. So you know, it's pretty it's pretty good at giving you the sound from a keyboard or any kind of instrument that you would come across as far as you know, running sound here. On top of that, we've got number 17 and 18 here on the snake, and we usually do use these for 1/4-inch outputs that people may be using on their instruments, so a keyboard or a guitar. And what we do when we do that is we want to unplug the corresponding channel's XLR microphone kind of cable, and we want to plug in the TSLR cable. Now, it's important to remember this, because if the XLRs are currently plugged in, well, these are plugged in because of how these channels are set up. Remember how I was saying that the channels are number 3 and 4, then 5 and 6. The channels will prioritize the XLRs before the 1/4-inches. So if there is an XLR plugged in here, even if there's no microphone plugged up on the snake, you will not hear the guitar or the keyboard. So it's just really important to remember that you need to unplug those XLRs before sending signal down these 1/4-inch outputs. So when you are running a guitar, it's preferably noted that you should leave this 80 Hertz cut on. That means press down. While if it was a keyboard here on 3 and 4, or a similar instrument like a sampler, something that's going to have a ground in a signal and isn't actually going to have any kind of pickups or microphones involved in its sending of that signal, you would want to remove the 80 Hertz cut, or press the button so that it is in the up position. As you can see the white there on the mixer. So that's essentially the 1919 Hemphill kind of layup. One more thing I'll go over is this phantom power button. It's important to always, when you're about to turn on phantom power for phantom power microphones, which are microphones that require electricity to function, that you turn down the volume on these knobs down here, the monitor knobs and the stereo knobs. If you don't, there'll be a large like clicking noise in the mix. I can actually probably get one to come out, maybe not. And that noise, when there's no microphone attached to it, is perfectly fine. But if there is a phantom power microphone attached to the end of that signal, basically what's going to happen is you're going to have an uncontrollable amount of feedback followed by a loud ring, and that's not good for the speakers, and it's not good for your ears. So definitely want to turn those down before engaging phantom power. But essentially, phantom power works with the idea that there's a microphone, and for it to have the signal sent, it needs to have an electrical signal sent through it. And that's what phantom power does. It sends voltage down the signal line to that microphone, so that that microphone can then send that signal back, or revert that signal back to this mixer to be processed by these knobs. So let's go check out that snake, and I'll show you guys a little bit about how this is all laid out. But just keep in mind that these outputs are 19 and 20, and that the inputs for guitars and things like that are going to be the 17 and 18. Alright, you guys, are you ready? Okay, so Chris Goddard here again. Here we have the snake at 1919 Hemphill. This is a Stagemaster snake. It's got approximately 20 inputs, 4 of those being 1/4-inch TSLR, and the rest of them being XLR, you know, microphone kind of plugs that we see on this. And essentially, as we saw at that mixer that we looked at earlier, these numbers correspond to a cable that's run out of the other end of this cable, which wraps around the entire building here. And at the other end of that cable are some wires with numbers on them, and each of those corresponds to these actual channels. So when people talk about snakes, they refer to this as the head and the back part back by the mixer as the rattler. So just some kind of like terminology for you that I've heard a lot of people use. So again, here's 19 and 20. Remember, we saw those coming out of the mixer, one being stereo and one being the monitors. And those wires, as you can see, and this is important for troubleshooting, you should always check here if there's any kind of problems first. First you want to check, make sure the microphone's plugged in and whatnot. Then you maybe want to check and make sure that these wires are plugged into the snake correctly. But these wires go all the way around the back of the stage area here and wind up at the back of this actual PA head. And since it's pretty dark, I'm going to go ahead and pull it out here after I turn the thing off.
Pull it out.
I'll show you guys how to turn it off and stuff so you don't fuck it all up. But essentially, if we can get back... So, sorry, we had to get some light. But anyways, as I was saying, so this wire right here that I'm kind of pointing at is 19. And that's the output on that mixer. That goes into the snake and then comes out on this wire, and that's actually going into the channel 1 input of this compressor. And if you will actually look on the compressor here, there's actually two sets of inputs. There's an XLR input and there's a 1/4 inch input, and that's what we're using. We're using the 1/4 inch input with the dB -10. Kind of, it subtracts a little bit of volume from the signal, which kind of eliminates some of the noise that we hear. But anyways, that comes out of the output of the compressor right here. It goes into our big boy, which is our Crown K1. That's this bottom box right here. And then the signal from the box, or the amplifier, is sent back out via these two banana plugs back to our large speakers that you find underneath the monitors. So then the second wire that we were seeing over there by the snake comes back over here from this wire down, runs on the floor. It's a live wire, and it'll come up and it runs into the second input into channel 2, then back out the output of channel 2 of this compressor, and then it comes back down and goes into channel A, the input for channel A on this PV amplifier. That signal is then sent out via 1/4 inch outputs of the PV and then into the top monitors. So when troubleshooting back here for issues with sound, as far as speakers aren't making any noise or anything like that, I would start with this amplifier. I noticed that the top speakers, which this is in correspondence to the top Yamaha Club Series monitors that we have on top of our large Crown Vegas speakers. I usually find the cables hanging out like that, and so all you got to do is just shove them right back in. You don't have to turn anything off when you do it. That's preferred, but if it's during a show, just go for it. No one's going to notice that pop. It's not really going to hurt anything too bad. The second thing you'll find is that this wire, one of these wires that goes into the compressor, as far as the input for the compressor, those like to fall out as well. So just remember that that when you're dealing with that, you definitely need to make sure you're putting it back where it goes, kind of tracing where all those wires go. So just refer to this video when wondering what goes where and stuff like that. If the PV ever just stops working and doesn't turn on, which has never happened to me, but I've had it happen to my Crown QSC GX5, you can just flip this breaker, and what that'll do is that'll just kind of reset it if it was just a power surge issue or something of that nature. So that's pretty much how the back end of our PA system is set up and how it works. Next thing I'm going to go over is just where everything kind of is.
over here, if we can see, there's a drawer, and this is where we keep all of our microphones. Some are in better shapes than others. There's one in here particularly right now with a switch on it, and I don't like to use that for things where people need to hold on to it, because their hands tend to flick the switch and they get angry because they think it's my fault that they're not making any noise, and you know, who knows. But you know, this microphone is a pretty good mic, and so is this. The preferred microphone, if you ever see one in here, is the SM58. This is an SM58, but it has a switch, so SM58s are always the best way to go. So here on the front of the console, or the rack here, we have our compressor like we saw back at my apartment, with the expander gate and the compressor and all of that, like I was talking about before. And as you can see, they are kind of set up a little bit differently. You can see slight subtle differences between the two channels, but essentially this side of the compressor corresponds to the Crown K1, which corresponds to the large Crown Vega speakers on the bottom of our speaker setup. And this channel right here corresponds to this PV amplifier like we saw in the back, and that corresponds to the top speakers, the Club Series speakers on the top of our Crown Vegas. So that's pretty much it for this console over here. There's a large area up here that you can usually find tape, scissors, maybe some tools, things like that, and that could be of use during a show or whatnot. The next thing you'll notice here is there's like a whole bunch of wires and stuff, and somebody has pissed me off and put the wrong wires in the wrong box, but who does that? It makes me so mad. It's whoever practices here. If you practice here and you do this, I'm mad at you. But basically, this is where the XLR microphone cable should go, in this box. This is where the electrical extension cords should go. Any kind of excess power sources, things like that. Swan spots are in there. There are power strips galore in that box. That's where they go, extension cords, things like that. And then in this box, this is where we put 1/4-inch cables, guitar cables, patch cables, things like that. That's like what I like to have in this box. Of course, right now it's kind of a mess, but you know, we haven't had a cleanup day in a while, so you know, we'll see. But anyways, I'm going to show you guys quickly how to correctly coil a cable real quick, as some of you guys just seem to not know. There's like a couple different ways to do this, but you know, I've learned the military way, which is how the Army kind of coils wires, and it doesn't hurt the wires at all. It's a perfectly fine way of doing it. Of course, somebody else has coiled this incorrectly, and what happens when you do that is you get these freaking kinks in the wire, and that's not good for it. It'll eventually cause the wire to fail. Of course, they're live wires, so you just take them back to Guitar Center and they'll give you a brand new one. Just make sure they give you the proper length, because sometimes they get stingy. But essentially, you take the wire, and what I like to do is I take my t-shirt like this, and I run my t-shirt down the wire, and what it'll do is it'll kind of get some of these kinks out of it by making the wire kind of rotate. If you'll notice that hardcore shows, the wire will get all wobbled up, like kind of like that, and that's what happens is the wire will spin and it'll get weird. But essentially, you take the wire and you kind of do that, and then you take both ends of the wire and you put both ends of the wire together, and then you've got a shorter kind of wire here, and then you take the other two, like the other end of the wire and the other end of the wire, and you put those together like that. And you do it again until you have a, you know, condensed, you know, version of the wire that you once had that was really long. And this wire has some Velcro. So when the wire has Velcro, you should use the Velcro and just basically, see, this is what happens when you kink it. It gets hard to work with. But you fold the wire over with the Velcro, you take the Velcro and you wrap it around.
and that's the best way to treat this wire. The other way is to coil it over and under. I'm not going to show you that because it's kind of hard to do. A lot of people can't figure it out, you know, whatever. It takes a while to do. I don't like to do it. But that's another way that doesn't hurt the wires. But for time's sake of how easy this is to fold out, I mean, I'll show you. You just kind of undo the Velcro. You kind of come around, if I can do this right, and you kind of grab right here in the middle where the kind of the bowl of the thing is, and you grab that, and you grab this side. You kind of be careful. You just kind of drop them to where they don't go through anything. You find them again, just like that, and now your wire's out, ready to go. Really quick way of unfolding a wire. And the speed at which you can do this is incredibly fast. So if you're on a 6-band Parker Lawson show, the other way without Velcro is you just kind of take it, kind of twirl it like that. The rabbit goes through the hole. And you don't want to tighten it too much, but just kind of do that. Take this, put it in that box, close it, good to go. Finally, the last thing I'll go over with you are these guys. These are some really good microphone stands. These are the ones that I like to use. They're what they call telescoping. So what that means is they'll kind of come out, you know, all kinds of different ways. There's all little knobs on them and stuff like that. And there's these microphone clips, or I'm sorry, microphone cable clips, and it's very important that you keep those on these stands. They're really nice, and they do an excellent job of keeping the clutter and things like that cool. Let's see, I guess the final thing I'll go over with you is how you should have a band kind of set up here. And the reality of the situation is that 1919, it does sound great, and it is a great noise environment. It is a concrete room, and because of that, the sound kind of works in a way where by the time it reaches the end of the red carpet here, we want to make sure that that sound is together and like it sounds like one instrument. If you can imagine like a marching band sounds like one instrument by the time it reaches the stands of the football people, you know, watching the game or whatever, you know, you want the sound of the band to be mixed together as one instrument by the time it reaches the crowd. And the best way to do that is to tell the people in the bands to push their equipment as far back on this wall as you can get them, and to have the drummer as far back as possible. And what that'll do is that'll allow that sound to mix, as well as giving you plenty of room to move the microphone stand back and forth, you know, so that you can get, you know, ample volume without much feedback in this really shitty concrete room. So yeah, that's the video that we talked about at the meeting. If you have any questions, you can talk to me or Alex or Al. Lacey's pretty good at running sound too. You know, it's not that hard to do once you get in kind of, you know, a little knack for it. It kind of becomes like a fun little thing to do. You might want to do it a little bit more. But yeah, that's technically how you do it here at 1919. Can't really think of anything else to add. I guess I could go over the final stage of troubleshooting. I don't know, I might do that in another video, but basically the #1 problem we have in here is sometimes people will hit this wire that runs over this speaker, and take a look at it. It's all bent the fuck up. So we have to take this wire back to Guitar Center all the time. And if you ever see it and it looks real bad, just run it over there. They'll change it out for free. They've done it for me about 100 times. But the channels that it goes in are just fine. The wire is quite fucked. You know, longer one would be tight, but it doesn't happen. But anyways, that's it, dude. Keep it Rizzle.
All right, my name's Tommy. I've been recording this whole time. 1919, you guys rock.